post-war economic collapse and the tension between the Soviet Union and the United States in the Cold War and foreign affairs will turn this period of the late 1940s and into the 1950s into a period of extreme anxiety in American history. There is a fear that the end of the war will return us to the Great Depression, as soldiers return and need jobs, and money that had previously gone unspent because of wartime scarcity begins to be spent. Demand is strong. A $6 billion tax cut, because now we don't have to pay for the war anymore, will also stimulate the economy. In 1944, Congress had passed the GI Bill. As a way of rewarding our troops who fought in the war, the GI Bill will provide veterans with either a house or pay for their college, or the money to buy a house, I should say. It is clearly the New Deal ethos, government helping regular people. Women, by the way, got few GI Bill benefits, even women who served in the WACs and the WAVES, which were officially part of the military. It was administered at the state level, which meant that southern states frequently chose to deny those benefits to African Americans. We do see significant inflation, 15% over the first 2 years at the end of the war. The end of the war brought major strikes as well in the auto, electrical, and steel industries. In April of 1946, John Lewis leads the United Mine Workers on a strike and shuts down the coal fields for 40 days. Truman seizes control of the mines and intends to force them to reopen, but the pressure on the owners causes them to cave. A strike also completely shuts down the railroads in America. Truman threatens to use the army to run the trains, and this breaks that strike in just a couple of days as well. So here is Truman versus organized labor. Women and minorities are pushed out of the workforce as the soldiers come home and are ready to work. But 80% of women still want to work. Divorce rates spike. As you can imagine, if you get married, particularly when you're very young, and your husband goes off and fights in the war for a number of years and comes home, these two people who may have been in love when they were 18 or 19 may not really know each other now. Not only the natural process, the extreme emotional changes we go through during those years of our lives, but the husband has now spent a few years fighting a war. And so they come home, and very often we see marriages falling apart. Women move out of the manufacturing sector, which returns to being traditionally male work, and move into the service sector because many women have become accustomed to working and choose not to leave the workforce when the war ends. Right after victory in Japan Day, Truman will go to Congress and propose a 21-point fair deal, he calls it. Of course, Roosevelt had the square deal. Teddy Roosevelt did. FDR had the New Deal, and now Truman is going to try his own, the fair deal. He wants to expand Social Security, raise the minimum wage to 65 cents, which was more back then than it is now, use federal money to ensure full employment, meaning that the government will hire people to make sure that we don't have excess unemployment in the economy. He wants to take the Fair Employment Practices Act, which had made it illegal not to deny people work because of their race. He wants to make that permanent. He wants to create a public housing program for the poor, use federal dollars to rebuild the depressed inner-city neighborhoods. He wants long-range environmental planning and government dollars to be spent on research and development, not just during wartime, but all the time. He later adds to his fair deal federal aid for education to allow people who aren't veterans to go to school with government help. He proposes single-payer insurance, meaning that we would have government-provided health care insurance, not government-provided health care. It's a mistake people make all the time. He proposes the nationalization of atomic energy. He wants a federal program to create atomic energy to power our nation. And he also proposes a St. Lawrence Seaway up in the Great Lakes region. This is probably the most progressive agenda any president has ever laid out. I would argue more progressive even than the New Deal. The Republicans will respond to these with their "had enough" campaign. Basically, they're saying, have you had enough of FDR and now Truman's big government programs? And this works. In 1946, the Republicans win big in the House and the Senate. They, having now controlling Congress, they dramatically cut government spending. They do not pass Truman's Fair Deal. I don't think they pass any of it. And they begin to try to dismantle the New Deal reforms that have been put in place under FDR. Probably the most controversial piece of legislation of that time is the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947. And what it does is it makes it illegal to force someone to join a union to work in a factory or an industry. It allows individual states to pass right-to-work laws, which is banning the closed shop. The closed shop is when you have to join the union, which effectively destroys the unions. If you live in a state like I do, where they have what they call right-to-work laws, you don't have strong unions. It also gave the president the power to delay strikes that threaten the public health or safety by imposing a 10-week cooling-off period before the strike can begin, which severely undermines the effectiveness of strikes. Unions refer to it as the Slave Labor Bill. Truman vetoes it when the Republican Congress passes it, but the Republicans easily override the veto. It did not ultimately hurt large, stable unions like the United Auto Workers or the United Mine Workers, but it did severely cripple the ability of new unions to begin, or smaller unions to grow to be more powerful unions. And here we see right-to-work states versus closed-shop states on this map here. The right-to-work states are the blue states, primarily, as you can see, in the South and the West.